The 80s had the General. The 90s had John Gilligan. In the noughties, it was the reign of Martin Marlowe Hyland. His was a familiar path with success and power, and then the recklessness. He had to go, because with him, an innocent young man doing an honest day's work died. Crime World presents Caught in the Crossfire, the unsolved murders of coke kingpin Marlowe Hyland and innocent Anthony Campbell. Available now on all podcast platforms. We were looking back there trying to find the original story on this, and this is the payments made to criminals in the Cherry Orchard area for protection rackets on building sites, and couldn't find the bloody thing. Of course, we weren't looking far back enough because that story was in 2016, and I think it was one of those stories that was out there, and very quickly the kind of Kinahan-Hutch feud monstered it up, and it didn't sort of get followed up until it next landed in court by the Criminal Assets Bureau. It's a fascinating story, and in a way this week it has come to its supposed conclusion in that an independent report into Dublin City Council bosses about the handling of this was sort of given a there's nothing to see here.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose
local councillors still demanding the full report to be made public.
So, I mean, like it's, as you said, it's 2016 to 2024. So 8 years later, what we had first in the Sunday World this weekend was we had some details of the findings of this report. So basically what happened was, it was first in the Sunday World in 2016 that there was allegations that two very senior criminals, Derek Dee Dee O'Driscoll and David Reilly, were basically getting protection money. There was construction projects going on in Cherry Orchard. These construction projects were on behalf of Dublin City Council. Dublin City Council were paying for them. They'd hired a builder's firm, and during the course of the building being done, they were being vandalised. There was problems with antisocial behaviour, and in order to deal with that, a couple of gangsters basically were getting money, and the problems were gone away. Now, Derek Dee Dee O'Driscoll, he has been at the top of the criminal ladder for 2 decades at least. Originally kind of an associate of George the Penguin Mitchell and even John Gilligan. Also famously appeared for the court cases of Mark the Guinea Pig Desmond. Probably hit his early tabloid fame because he didn't keep a Jaguar in his garage or something like that.
Sergal or something. It wasn't a Jaguar. Maybe it was both.
Yeah, well, big cats. Big cats. And so just a very well-known criminal. And David Reilly, who's been a constant target for the Criminal Assets Bureau, served a number of sentences for sort of violent crimes, and was named during CAB proceedings as a major player in the drugs trade in Ballyfermot. So these guys were getting money, as a result to provide protection, which became a major political scandal.
And there was reasons for that. Now, anybody in the construction industry who's listening to this thinks, where's the story here? Because, of course, construction sites are constantly hit by criminals, local criminals, and protection money is often sought, sometimes paid, sometimes not. Sometimes private security is brought in to a building site. The point about this story is this was in Cherry Orchard. These were fast builds, they were calling them. So the council had wanted these houses to be turned around very quickly. I don't understand construction, but these were something that could come up very, very, very quickly. There was a kind of a time limit put in. It was to alleviate some of the housing difficulties within the council. And of course, when the Criminal Assets Bureau started to look into Dee Dee O'Driscoll and David Reilly, this is where they discovered these payments. The story and the scandal, I suppose, around it was not the fact that criminals were putting the heavy on builders for protection.
Which would still be a story, it has to be said.
Absolutely, but this was because that these criminals were supposed to have been introduced to the builders by council workers. They had given the introductions. The allegations was that Dublin City Council weren't paying them directly, but in furnishing the construction firms with the money for these sort of, I suppose, false invoices that were drawn up by O'Driscoll and Reilly. They were claiming they were doing fence management or something.
Yeah.
They didn't exist. And ultimately, basically, the bill was being paid by the council to these criminals. So that was really, I suppose, the political scandal of it. But yeah, of course it's a scandal that criminals target construction sites, but they do. And particularly what they know is that in many cases, the builders who have drawn down from the banks to get these housing projects, vast housing projects, maybe involving 100, 200 houses, they've drawn down the money from the bank. They're paying interest. They need to get these constructions finished. They need to get those houses sold in order to furnish back the loan and move on to the next project. So if they agitate in these building sites, burn down houses at night, they'll delay the whole process. And the criminals have often found that sometimes the construction industry rolls over and pays them. That's why they do it.
Yeah, but it's bad when, if you want to look at it, it's bad if private construction company does that. But the huge scandal arises if ultimately taxpayers' money is going into the hands of very established and people that even back in the day we would have had no problem saying these are gangland criminals.
But I have to say, just staying on the private industry for a little minute, it is very difficult for them because, you know, they are faced with, you look at what happened up around Cavan with the whole former Quinn Industries and the amount of money that had to be pumped into security there. Because like that sort of vandalism can really screw up, you know, a finely balanced and tuned project that is all relying on these massive loans from the bank. People in the construction industry do realise how quickly somebody can go under these massive loans and all the rest of it. And private industries, I mean, you know, there recently we were looking at the Drogheda feud, and the fact of the matter was those gangs up in Drogheda were putting the heavy on some private industry that was up there, that was, you know, in the town.
Look, it's the oldest freaking crown in a way. If you look in the US, the mafia, like that's how they really did their business. And if you see what happened in Cherry Orchard, this is some of the stuff that came out ultimately in the cab case. Stolen cars were driven into the perimeter fence of the site. A porta-cabin was burnt out and the digger was set alight after petrol was thrown on it while it was in use. The driver was hit by a brick and broke his ribs when he ran from the vehicle, and it was set alight. And there was even evidence of kids as young as 12 being used to carry out some of these attacks. So it's a very, very complicated problem. You know, so obviously the construction firms are in a no-win situation, but that kind of protection...
Well, they can either hire private security or they can go down the road of paying these thugs.
Yeah.
And they have those two options. And of course, the advice would be hire private security, have the site secured 24/7 and have patrols on that at night.
Yeah.
And that will secure a site. But, you know, sometimes these criminals are kind of being presented or are presenting themselves as if they are private security.
Or as a cheaper option than private security as well.
All those things.
That is what it was said. I mean, there was huge amounts of money paid over to Reilly and O'Driscoll. I mean, I think it was in total like 550,000. So it's a huge amount of money. That was over a couple of years. But to hire private security to monitor somewhere 24 hours a day, especially at night, would be hugely expensive as well. So you can see what their dilemma is. But if you look at the experience of New York, where if you look at any of the famous mafia films of recent years, you can see where they have a mafia guy sitting on the site doing nothing. Like that's corrosive as well for how business operates, and it is a problem. Like
financially, and everybody knows I'm not the best with this, but I will throw in that I suppose hiring private security is a legitimate costing that can be put through the legitimate books without kind of risking any revenue issues for big companies. Whereas paying off criminals under the counter or through false invoicing is actually creating as big a problem for the construction industry as the one they're in the first place. So obviously the recommendations all the way through would be to hire private security. And I mean, you'd be amazed how, you know, it doesn't actually take that many personnel and bodies to secure a site. Your eyes and ears, they're obviously not going to go into battle against people, but they are there to either call in police should something be happening. And of course, the Gardaí respond to these kind of attacks. So what happened here, one way or another, was the wrong way to do your business. The firms, perhaps, and I think what they have, insisted, the firms that were involved in this, they didn't know who these guys were. They were introduced to them, or the allegation, certainly what the CAB felt they uncovered at the time, was that these introductions had been made by council workers. This report, which was established, has found that these council workers had no knowledge of who.
Well, so it's a complicated thing, right? So this shows you another bit of how the country works, right? So this was a big scandal. It actually, at first, it was, the story broke in the Sunday World, as I said, and ultimately then CAB brought cases against David Reilly and Dee Dee O'Driscoll and took money and explained what their involvement in crime. In the aftermath then, the government ordered an investigation.
Because that evidence was put before the court by the Criminal Assets Bureau.
Yes, right. So that's 2019. Did you ever see In the Thick of It, that sitcom about the internal workings of British politics? No?
Not sure.
So there's a great scene in it where he's a minister and he's under pressure. And, he doesn't know if he's going to be fired or whatever. And he comes back into the room after talking to the Prime Minister and he said, yes, there's a report, there's an investigation is being done, and they all high-five each other.
Great way to buy yourself time.
Exactly. So that happened in 2019. A senior counsel was appointed to look into it by Owen Murphy, at the time the Minister for Housing, if you remember him. And, this story goes out of public consciousness. Mm-hmm. In fairness, Maeve Sheehan of the Sunday Indo continued to write about this on and off over the years. So that happens, somebody's appointed, and then all of a sudden you start hearing less and less and less about it. And 5 years later, in the meantime, the guards have conducted another investigation, a criminal investigation into, let's just say broadly, not just into the criminals, but into other people. In November last year, they come back and say the DPP have directed no charges is to be brought against anybody in connection with this incident. At that point, you would think that has delayed the publication, according to the people who received the publication, because they couldn't be seen to publish something that would interfere with the workings of justice if somebody was to be prosecuted. But the report is still not made public. Now, the report, makes a number of findings. A senior counsel in those, not to get too technical about it, but they'll interview people. I mean, they don't have the same powers of to compel people to speak that the Gardaí would. They would have access to documentation. But basically what they found was, one of the key findings, I suppose, and it's the one that we reported on, was that Dublin City Council did not take steps to inform themselves in the aftermath of this going out, about what payments were going on, and what they should have known about it, basically. It also finds, however, that there was, and I'll just find this in particular.
I found no evidence exists to show whether anybody within senior management of the approved housing body either knew or had suspicions about the payment of money by the building contractor.
Yes, and it says he concluded that the senior council concluded that neither the management of Dublin City Council nor the approved housing body but took steps to inform themselves about what activities were taking place. And he pointed out that employees from both the organisation were interviewed by Garda Síochána about the criminal activities on the sites, but when the employees returned to their jobs, neither management took steps to find out what was going on. So they just let it be. And he concluded that there was no explanation was offered by the organisations.
So sorry, just to break that down. He's saying there was no evidence to exist that anybody in senior management of Dublin City Council knew or had any suspicions about these payments of monies.
Well, I don't know if they say no suspicions today, but he says the senior council found no evidence that Dublin City Council had reimbursed contractors for protection payments made to O'Driscoll. He also found no evidence of invoices being raised with Dublin City Council for payment of monies, as had been alleged at the CAB proceedings. But he concluded that the central issue in this case, whereby contractors are being intimidated into paying protection money, is a question of law and order, not a question of contract or their administration.
But in other words, they didn't know or have suspicion that any money was being, that the payment of any, about any of the payments of money by the building contractor. In other words, the building contractor had given Dublin City Council a breakdown of what it was paying out, and they had no suspicions around any of that. Okay?
Well,
Senior management. That's what the report so far has said.
Yeah.
And also, on another side of the coin, when they found out about that, they didn't then go on to sort of investigate it
and
themselves.
see. Yes, they did not bring anybody in.
That is
How did this arise? That is a criticism. And that is a criticism that they didn't set out to inform us, and it says inform themselves. And he concluded that there's no evidence that members of Dublin City Council were aware of the activities involving. So there's no evidence of it. That's what he's been able.
That's so far what big and obviously Dublin City Councillor Mannix Flynn wants the full publication as a matter of huge public interest, along with others, because we're just getting little tidbits from the report's conclusions.
Yes.
We haven't seen the full report, and obviously we would be very interested in reading that ourselves and maybe reporting on it. But ultimately, this is nothing to see here. They probably should have informed themselves and investigated in the aftermath. They didn't, but nobody knew anything as it was going along.
These senior councils, they can get access to documentation and they can interview people, but he can't find any evidence that they knew. Mm-hmm. Obviously, during the CAB case, different evidence was given where, during those proceedings, the Criminal Assets Bureau said that they gave belief evidence that people from the council employees had made the introductions and, knew what was going on. I mean, that was their specific evidence. But he's saying that he can't find any evidence that they're, and that's his findings. Yeah. So we're getting obviously bogged down in the legalities of this, but it just shows you, I suppose, over an 8-year period, what we knew in 2016 was these gangsters were getting protection money to stop
attacking a building,
attacking a building site. And 8 years later, have we got to the bottom and ensured that this will never happen again, I suppose? And, it's hard to look at that, and this is just my opinion, and say, no, we have,
it's going on everywhere.
It's going on everywhere.
Extortion of building in the construction industry and business industry, it does go on. But I suppose that the more we talk about it, you know what I mean, that you can it would be the Garda's position to encourage anybody that is being blackmailed or extorted or anything to come to them for help as opposed to paying. It's a little bit like when the guys call to the door demanding a drug debt of the parents of some kid who's run it up. The advice would be, do not pay, because in the end of the day, there is no actual agreement with these people. No. These are criminals. You don't have down in writing a legal agreement that this is all you're going to pay, because they will keep coming back for more. And if they know you're good for it, you can be damn sure that they'll come back looking for more and more and more.
Well, look, this is just a bit from the CAB case. So you have this, there's no evidence, and that senior counsel's looked into it, and he seems to have done a very thorough job. But what you heard during the CAB case was a building inspector with Dublin City Council told CAB, when he had asked local youths who could solve this problem of the thing being attacked, within 30 minutes he was met by David Reilly, who assured him he could stop it like that. And obviously there's what can be proven in a court and what evidence can be given. But I think it's clearly from his, you know what you're dealing with to some extent when somebody can make that commitment straight away. Look, David Reilly is a particularly dangerous character. As you said, he's been, the cab case heard, he had been linked to 3 murders, and one of them as part of a long-going feud in Ballyfermot. He denied all knowledge and never been charged. But these are people that had been, Dee Dee O'Driscoll had first appeared in the Sunday World 10 years earlier. And David Reilly as well had been in.
They're feared. And I mean, certainly O'Driscoll has links to the likes of the family grouping in Ballyfermot. They're there a long time. They're around a long time. I mean, he might have first appeared 10 years ago. I remember talking about and writing about O'Driscoll 20 years ago.
Yeah.
He's a long time in the business and is quite a clever and wily criminal. And, that is just a little window into what's going on and I suppose maybe what's funding. To be able to show up, say, I'll stop that because I control things and pocket 300,000 from one construction firm is quite a skill in life to have.
It's a huge amount of money. I mean, a huge amount of money. And it also shows, I suppose, how these guys like O'Driscoll and Reilly, like they're bad influences to have in an area because it's not just that they could direct the young people to carry out that antisocial behaviour. It's known in Cherry Orchard where guards have come under attack as well in that area that it is believed that those 2 people were also involved in directing that sort of antisocial behaviour. So these people can really, cause huge amounts of problems for a local community. Just a couple of characters like that who are intent on criminal behaviour up to that level.
And of course, the construction industry, the building of homes, it's such a huge issue.
Yeah.
It's such a, there's such urgency to it all as well, that, but I do recall a builder explaining to me, his logic in paying off these guys. And it was all to do with the pressure of the loan that was bearing down on him and how he needed to get this. He needed to meet his deadlines. And the quickest way he believed he could do so was to just pay up. Now, they're not all like that. There's some builders are way tougher and they will, as I said to you. And the advice would always be to employ private security, which is probably the easier way in the long run. But, criminals always see the weaknesses in any system or in any human being and they prey on that.
They do, and they have, as you said, it's a common good for social housing, I think, which was a large part of those developments to be built. I mean, it's good for everybody, good for that community. A lot of the people who would move into those homes will be local people. So it just shows you how little they care about even their own communities, let alone the broader society.
Right, Niall, thank you so much.
Thanks, Nicola.
I'm Nicola Tallant and you're watching Crime World, a podcast about criminals, drugs and the underworld in Ireland and across the globe. Make sure you subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you can be the first to watch all our latest episodes. You can also listen wherever you get your podcasts.